Right now we're hearing a bird here. It's a spotted sandpiper. A lot of birding we do by ear.
The call of a loon is unmistakable. It's very familiar to anyone who visits Vermont's larger lakes.
You become so used to them, and listening to them, you can tell the difference in their call, and they have quite a personality.
Linda and Bob Tucker spend a lot of their time on the water. The Ludlow couple are avid kayakers and regularly visit a number of the lakes in southern and central Vermont. They enjoy the exercise, but are usually paddling with a purpose.
He's actually the Loon Ranger, and I'm his assistant. So yes, I go when I'm needed to different places, and he gets me into positions that are really strange, like swimming across the lake to get an egg out of a nest because he can't get close enough with the kayak. You know, that sort of thing is my job.
The Tuckers were recruited by friends to volunteer for the Vermont Loon Conservation Project about 20 years ago.
We had seen loons, heard loons, as we ran around Lake Echo in Vermont. We didn't really know what, we were always asking, what is that? And finally we saw some.
Loons return to Vermont from the New England coast at the end of winter. They start nesting from May to mid-June. The birds are easy to find and watch because of their distinctive black and white coloring and because they spend most of their time on the water.
And we watch them through the summer until they learn to fly, and right up until they leave just before ice. I've been out when there's ice around Lake Nineveh and out there with them, and the little ones are still there. The parents have left. The little ones leave at the end, just before ice sets in. They seem to know because it's only a couple days and there's ice. So I've watched them from the beginning to the end.
When the Tuckers got involved in the project, the loon population in the state was facing a crisis.
They were put on the state endangered species list. Throughout the 80s and early 90s, they were trying to figure out, okay, where's the bigger problem? We put out these nest warning signs to attempt to try to give this island a little bit of space where the loons would nest.
Eric Hansen knows loons.
Takes about a month of incubation. Both male and female share in everything, whether it's nesting, chick rearing, feeding the chick, doing everything. Their behaviors are pretty much identical as far as amount of time spent. When the chicks hatch, they can actually swim within hours. They leave the nest right away. They're done with the nest, pretty much for the rest of the summer. That chick may not touch land until it breeds, which on average is a 7-year-old loon. So 7 years of just being on the water or in the air.
Hansen is the project coordinator for the Vermont Loon Conservation Project, which is part of the Vermont Center for Eco Studies, or VCE. The effort started in the late 1970s when scientists realized that the number of loons nesting in the state had dropped dramatically.
So in 1983, there were only 7 pairs that nested in the entire state and maybe another 5 pairs that were around, and they only counted 29 adult loons that year, going statewide to most of the larger lakes. And they realized, there's something going on. So in 1987, they were put on the state endangered species list.
At that time, scientists took a look at the remaining loons and their habitats to figure out what had caused the drastic decline and what could be done to turn it around. One piece of the puzzle was identifying certain types of lead fishing lures as poisonous to the birds and getting those banned. Another important piece was to protect the areas where loons build their nests.
And one of the bigger issues that came up, or obvious issues, especially one that we could have an effect, was at the nesting site. They're very prone to disturbance. They don't walk on land, so if something comes near them, they want to get into the water. They feel safe in the water, but they don't really feel safe sitting there, whether that's a human on shore, whether it's a boater. So trying to protect some of the sites that are on busier lakes. Another place was places like this, reservoirs that go up and down with hydro operation. Is there anything hydro companies could do to stabilize water? Loons are only nesting just an inch to 4 or 5 inches off the water, somewhere in there. Sometimes it can be a foot, but it doesn't take much for water to go up and flood a nest.
on islands where the birds just can't seem to get a purchase, a successful purchase for whatever reason, we'll use artificial islands. We call them platforms or rafts, which are just really cedar logs with a wire mesh, and we vegetate them. And the loons will use those for nesting. And those are great because they float up and down with the water.
VCE Executive Director Chris Rimmer says that the expanding loon population can lead to issues that are both good and bad.
As the population increases, which it is annually now, there are more and more loons coming back looking for new territories, looking for mates, and some of these birds are actually creating problems for the existing pairs. So a male, for instance, might come into a territory of an existing pair and try to evict the resident male, and there can be some really severe skirmishes. I would call them battles. Now it's a good sign because it means there's a lot of loons and we've done well and they're increasing, but we've seen some territorial takeovers. We've also seen some battles that have resulted in injury and even in 1 or 2 cases death of one of the 2 loons that was fighting. There aren't unlimited available territories for loons, so the birds are competing for the few vacancies that remain. It wasn't a problem we had to think about 20 years ago.
Scientists with the VCE say that a thriving loon population needs clean lakes, healthy shorelines, and a good food base. And all of those things are present here in Vermont. Over 80 pairs of loons have attempted to nest in recent years. But that is not enough to ensure long-term success. Along with the increase in the loon population is an increase in their interactions with humans.
We've done our job. The loons are back. We've changed our name. We're now the Vermont Loon Conservation Project. We're no longer the Vermont Loon Recovery Project. So that always begs the question, are we ready to pack up and leave and move on? For some species you can do that with. For loons though, their habitat overlaps almost entirely with our recreational habitat. Where we like to boat, where we like to picnic. And so there's always this sort of conflict, or potential for conflict. They're on reservoirs that are going to go up and down. So for at least half of our sites out there in the state, we're going to need some sort of management, whether it's nest warning signs or whether it's the rafts, or at least keeping tabs on them a little more closely.
The group currently has placed a number of signs on lakes around the state, indicating loon nesting areas and asking people not to disturb them. Raising awareness has also raised a sense of protectiveness in many places.
This pond is pretty well utilized by a lot of fishermen. There's a fisherman just coming in here. And yet these loon have been able to bring off youngsters over several years. And although it's a small pond and lots of people fishing here, it's amazing that with these signs that they put up, people, they basically feel that they need to protect these birds. And so I've never seen harassment, and the loons have been successful.
The Vermont Loon Conservation Project continues to get calls about loons in distress or stuck on lakes or ponds that aren't big enough for them. Despite that, the species as a whole is thriving in Vermont.
Loons are special just because they're so easy to become part of our lives.
Protecting a special bird and preserving Vermont's natural environment for generations to come. In Killington, I'm Rebecca Gollin with Across the Fence.